Orange and blue today. It's just me. Just Mace. But I'm live. A little bit late. But I'm live. Talking Broncos here on Orange and Blue today. Cecil Lammey on assignment in the parlance of the late, great Irv Brown. Mace here talking all things Denver Broncos as we get into it here on a nice Monday. Kind of the last quiet Monday. It's the calm before the storm, as it were. Here on Orange and Blue today, brought to you by our friends over at Ramos Law. It's really nice to say that, by the way. Thanks, Ramos Law, for joining us here to present Orange and Blue today. So, Broncos players report for training camp on Tuesday, the veterans report. The rookies have been around since last week, of course. They reported on Wednesday, and then RJ Harvey, the last to agree to his contract, and he was in shortly thereafter. But we heard from Nik Bonitto on Sunday. He of course, had his charity event, his camp that he had over at Columbine High School in Littleton on Sunday. We're going to get to some comments from him because there's a little bit of talk about his contract. There's some talk, of course, about his offseason and what he did to kind of build off of his rookie campaign. His contract is worth discussing, of course, because I think there's a real kind of fundamental question and something that the Broncos are going to have to confront here on Nik Bonitto and even on Zach Allen as well, as you start seeing these edge rusher contracts, these front seven contracts. We saw George Karlaftis' his contract come in today. It's a tough one to say. George Karlaftis is. I think that was like Elaine Bennis on Seinfeld saying Onassis is. But anyway, the Broncos are going to have to ask themselves about, okay, they're going to have to confront the reality that they are probably going to have to pay Nik Bonitto more than the reigning defensive player of the year, Pat Surtain. And if they want Zach Allen back, they're potentially going to have to do the same thing, pay him more on an average annual per year basis than the reigning defensive player of the year, just because of the going rate for pass rushers as we're seeing on the market right now. Is that something that you want to do? Is that something that you can do? That's simply the price tag for keeping an elite pass rusher like that around. So anyway, but the news today that was, of course, interesting throughout the NFL and affects the Broncos right out of the chute there in week one is the news that Will Levis of the Tennessee Titans is going to undergo season-ending shoulder surgery, because there was a chance the Broncos would not see Cam Ward in week one, that they would see Will Levis. And yes, Will Levis, he of the mayonnaise in his coffee and other such quirks. Yes, Will Levis was underwhelming last year, but he nevertheless is a quarterback who brought experience to the table coming back. So had he started week one, it would have allowed the Titans to avoid throwing Cam Ward, the number one overall pick, to the Wolves, basically. Now, the word is that Cam Ward is going to take all of the first team reps for the Tennessee Titans in training camp, which basically sets things up to have Cam Ward starting for the Titans in week one. Okay. So what does that mean historically? Well, let's take a look here. There have been, as you see, plenty of number one overall picks that start week one over the years. And of course, Broncos fans of a certain age remember John Elway doing just that back in 1983. And if you watch that game, if you remember that game from 42 years ago, you know that John Elway did not do very well, even though the Broncos are not only one of those 5 teams in the 5-19-1 record for teams that started number 1 overall quarterbacks in week 1. Only 5 teams in the common draft era since 1967 have won those games, and the Broncos of 1983 with John Elway were one of them. Certainly, John Elway was not a reason why the Broncos won because he didn't play very well in that game at Pittsburgh. That also is the only win that a team starting a number 1 overall rookie in week 1 on the road has ever had. So, number one overall picks starting on the road in week 1. Those teams are 1-9, with the only win coming in 1983 for the Broncos with John Elway, and Elway did not play very well. And then the final line there for number 1 overall picks starting in week 1, passer rating of 59.1. So not very impressive. The odds will be stacked against Cam Ward if he starts week 1. And that appears to be a likelihood the way it's going right now. So it's certainly it's exciting for the Broncos, certainly, if you're looking at hoping to get off to a fast start. Not that the Broncos were in bad shape facing the Titans. I think when the schedule came out, if you were hoping for something different than the last couple of years when the Broncos lurched slowly out of the gate and had to take their time getting back into it, you liked opening with the Titans a lot more, even though this is a stronger team with greater expectations than the teams of the last couple of years. You know that one thing that we've learned about Sean Payton coach teams here is that they tend to find their stride as you get toward the midseason and don't always have everything quite in place early. So having a more benign, winnable opening game like that, it's helpful. Getting a team like the Titans coming off of being the worst team in football last year, that was helpful to begin with. Now you get a team that's going to start a rookie quarterback, a number 1 overall pick, a situation that historically is bad for the team that starts that quarterback. More often than not, they're falling short. You love to see that if you're the Denver Broncos. To look just there's the stat, of course, about the the rookie quarter. That's actually, I have to say, that's rookie quarterbacks. That number, that year is wrong, by the way. That's a typo there. I'm sorry I didn't correct that. I was doing that right before the show. So this is actually, I know it says 1967 in the present for those of you who are watching and not listening on the podcast. This is actually rookie quarterback starting week 1, 2005 for the present. If I could strike through that, I would. So 2005 through the present, rookie quarterback starting week 1. So this is, I think, more relevant than maybe just 1967 for the present for number 1 overall picks. So you see teams with rookie quarterbacks starting week 1 in the last 20 years, those teams are 10-22-1 on the road, 5-13. And of course, the Broncos, one of those teams last year on the wrong side of it. And so you certainly recall last year, Bo Nix in week 1 and how ragged and how raw he was in that game. So Bo Nix had a terrific season, and yet right out of the blocks wasn't ready. Going on the road, certainly in a hostile environment like Seattle, that didn't help him either. So Cam Ward, the Titans, coming into Denver and facing a defense like the one the Broncos have with Nik Bonitto leading the way. And that brings us to good old number 15 here. Nik Bonitto, talking with the media. The first time he's had a press conference of any kind this offseason, as the offseason wound to a close, as he had his camp on Sunday. And this is somebody who is focused on his play. He said, first of all, he confirmed that the negotiations between his side and the Broncos are ongoing. So they are talking contract. We can confirm that now, that things are progressing. There is communication. But he did say he doesn't know when it's going to be done. He's deferring to his agent on that. But he said, hey, it could be tomorrow. It could be months down the line. All these negotiations are different. And I know after last year, when Quinn Miners got done early, by this time last year, Miners was done. That announcement came down just under a week before training camp, before the players reported. So I think that sort of got everybody a little bit off guard. Maybe it kind of spoiled everybody to think, oh, well, they're going to get these things done early. All these things are different. Remember, you had Quinn Miners, Pat Surtain, Jonathan Cooper, Garrett Bowles. And two of those did not happen until later on in the season, November, December. Cooper happening in early November, and then December was when Garrett Bowles went down. Pat Surtain, of course, happened toward the end of the preseason. So I don't think it's reason to panic that Nik Bonitto has not gotten done. The thing that is interesting, though, is just all the moving parts around Nik Bonitto. The fact that you have Zach Allen's contract expiring as well. Now we've got also Malcolm Roach and John Franklin Myers in play, but you have two second-team All-Pros in Nik Bonitto and Zach Allen, whose contracts are expiring, two pass rushers whose contracts are expiring. And it's a fair question to ask if you're the Broncos to say, okay, as we're looking at this, who's more responsible for the success of the pass rush? Is it Nik Bonitto? Is it Zach Allen? Now, certainly both deserve credit, but if you took one of them out, which one would be the player that you could handle losing more? Which player has the more irreplaceable skill set? That is something that may come into play. Age certainly comes into play as well because, of course, Nik Bonitto, he's going into his fourth year. Zach Allen, he's going into his seventh year. So with Nik Bonitto, you're talking about the second contract. With Zach Allen, you're talking about the third contract. Zach Allen's contract that you're talking, let's say it's a 3-year deal. Well, then the third year of that deal is going to be year 10. Now, he's a relatively young seventh-year player, so you're talking about him getting into the age 30 season with in year 10. So we're not talking about, say, like a Garrett Bowles where year 10 would be something different, where you're talking about mid-30s. That's not the case with Zach Allen, so that's something that's helpful as well, but it is part of the equation. It's also, so that's another reason why with Zach Allen, even though you want to tread carefully, if you do this, it's why maybe a franchise tag for Zach Allen, even though it would certainly not go over well from a team perspective, a franchise tag, which would put him in the mid 20s next year based on the projection for franchise tags for defensive ends. That might be a play to get him back for year 8 and then kind of see where he is. The problem is then, do you run the risk of messing up your reputation with players as another thing as well? Because one of the things that the Broncos have going for them right now, compared to, say, the mid to late 2010s, is they've got a good reputation. George Payton has done a nice job with that. So has ownership. The Broncos have an improved reputation with players league-wide as far as being a team that gets things done contractually, whereas in the 2010s, they were a team that was perceived by a lot of players as difficult to deal with contractually. That was kind of a hallmark, especially of the latter years of John Elway, that they didn't necessarily take care of their own players in a way that other teams did. And it was a point of frustration. So that's something to consider as well. If you don't pay Zach Allen and somebody else does, how does that go over? Is that something that ends up damaging your reputation? I mean, it's the same thing with Nik Bonitto as well. And Bonito has done really well. I mean, do you kind of run the risk of ruining the reputation there if you don't pay him? Another thing with Nik Bonitto, though, is, and I had this conversation with somebody this afternoon, the quality you have there at edge behind him. And George Payton talked at the league meetings about maybe Jonah Ellis is a guy who makes a leap like Nik Bonitto did. You've got Dondrea Tillman and Q Robinson. And we talked, Tillman had a very promising year as a rotational edge last year. Talked about how, in terms of sack rate, that he was a top 20 guy right there with Nik Bonitto last year. When you talk about where he was in terms of pass rush opportunities, pass rush snaps. So there are things to like about Dondrea Tillman. Do you maybe wait a little bit and see, okay, does Dondrea get out there and is that something he builds on? And let's see where Q Robinson is. If you put the pads on and some of that promise we saw in the offseason, does it translate when you really start getting into camping, you get into preseason games? Is he just an offseason stud? Or is there something really there as you start turning the pages? I mean, these are all things to come into play. David says Bonito will not get traded. No, he will not get traded. I think the boat on that sailed. I mean, we did a show a few months ago before the draft, sort of spitballing an idea that, what if you used Bonito to try to move up to 5 when Jacksonville still had that pick? Was that a way to move up and try to get Ashton Genty? Like, that was the chip if you didn't want to completely destroy your draft capital for the next few years to make an audacious move up the board. Like, that's something that was why we kind of brought that up. And also because, again, you've invested in young edges, and Jonah Ellis had a promising season. Dondrea Tillman showed some flashes, and now you add Q Robinson to that. To the Broncos' credit, they're doing a pretty good job of identifying edges in the draft. They seem to have locked onto something there. Broncos fan for life. You got to lock up Bonito and Allen for sure. Jones will likely be the replacement for John Franklin Myers. Okay, yet another thing that in good conversation that I had with a fellow Broncos reporter today, and we sort of said that, like, the way you can maybe see this trending, you can maybe see Savion Jones, if he develops, being somebody who does end up taking the spot of John Franklin Myers if they can't get something done with JFM in the next few months. I mean, you've only got so much. You can only bring so many guys back. You've always got churn. You're always bringing in some younger players. And while you are doing some of the things of putting players on credit cards, when you talk about some of the voidable years, I allude to some of that in the comments section of the Friday show, for example. You don't want to do too much of that. You don't want to do too much of, too much manipulation and too much on the credit card. Now, that being said, here's something to think about with Zach Allen. If you don't re-sign Zach Allen and you let him go, you let him walk, then because of the voidable years on his contract, you actually have a dead money figure for Zach Allen next year that will be north of $12 million because of the voidable years that will all kick in next year if you don't re-sign him. See, that's the whole thing with the voidable years. You add them on the end of the contract just to spread out the signing bonus to give you some savings right now, but then those numbers end up hitting and accelerating at the point where you cut the player. Now, and they all kind of hit at that moment. So it's one of those manipulations, tricks that you have on the salary cap to get you more money now, and then it ends up being something that you have to that you have to work around later. Michael, you need to keep the core players together. That's always a good point as well. But identify which players are a part of the core, and you can say Nik Bonitto is a part of the core. What is interesting is where Nik Bonitto was 12 months ago compared to now. He's certainly come along. He's come a long way. And it's actually something that I think is actually worth getting into here. A comment that he had going back yesterday. Well, I asked him about how he added bulk last year, and he added strength. He added some pounds. It helped him hold up better against the run. The thing that happened is that he held up better against the run, but he also found out something else about as the year went on, and it changed how he attacked this offseason. Here's what he had to say.
Just continue to, keep that weight, get stronger, more explosive, all those things, and definitely, just taking care of my body more. I feel like as the season went on, it was starting to, break down a little bit. So just making sure I'm taking care of my body and just refining pass rush skills and all that stuff.
So think about that. He says his body was breaking down as the season went on. I mean, I would say certainly he was still performing well, but very interesting that he talked about that. So be back in a little bit. We're going to hear from our friends over at Ramos Law.
Today's episode of Orange and Blue Today is presented by Ramos Law, the official injury law firm partner of the Denver Broncos. Ramos Law was founded by Dr. Joseph Ramos, an attorney and ER doctor, to provide exceptional care to those injured in accidents. With a unique understanding of both medicine and law, the Ramos Law team is built to fight for you every step of the way. Experience the Ramos Law difference. Contact them today at ramoslaw.com.
And we're back. See, you got a little Cecil today, even though he's not here, even though he is on assignment. He'll be back tomorrow, back from his respite. I had my respite. He had his respite. So to go back to Nik Bonitto for a moment, talk about his body breaking down. Now, playing at an additional weight helped him, but now he had to kind of account for that a little bit in terms of how he was physically. So that was a point of emphasis for him as he went through the offseason. So the other thing in general was he studied his film, did a lot of film study. He talked about that. And a big focus for him, he said, was on the plays he didn't make. That was he came back to that point a couple of times yesterday, how he focused on the sacks he didn't get. 13 and a half sacks. He's right up there, top 3 in the league. Great season, but left him wanting more. Focused on the sacks he didn't get. As he said, it's all about upping the ante this year.
Yeah, I kind of up the ante when it comes to that type of stuff. Like I said, just knowing the type of year I had and knowing how much food I left on the table still and how much better I feel like I can get in my game, I kind of wanted to address all those things in the offseason and just continuously trying to be a better player each year.
I mean, I like that attitude from him. I like the fact that he's focused on doing more, getting more out of himself. And certainly from an intangible perspective, that's what you want in the locker room. So That is another key thing that you consider as well. But of course, the other thing is it's not going to be cheap.
Yeah, I mean, the edge market is kind of crazy right now, just, knowing that, everybody's getting these big deals and it's only getting bigger and bigger. And, luckily for me, I'm in a good position right now where, the market's kind of in my favor.
So he gets it. Like he knows. I mean, he's not going to get Myles Garrett money. He's not going to get TJ Watt money, nor should he. I mean, Nik Bonitto's had one great season. Myles Garrett has had 6 double-digit sack seasons. So has TJ Watt. Myles Garrett and TJ Watt are on Canton trajectories. Nik Bonitto's done it once. So he shouldn't be there. But an edge rusher like Brian Burns is north of 25 million in average per year value. And that's why we're talking about Nik Bonitto probably being, in terms of market value, if he were to hit the market based on where he is right now, he's going to get $25 million a year if he goes on the market. If he didn't hit the market, if the Broncos couldn't get something done and they had to tag him, the tag is probably $27 million if they did tag him for next year. So either way, these are the numbers that are in his mind right now, in all likelihood, that are in his agent's mind. And I get the whole thing of being team first. I mean, certainly there are people out there who are going to see those kind of numbers, hear those kinds of numbers, and think, well, we should take less for the team. And I say, okay, are you taking less than market value from your employer? I don't think so. I mean, I wouldn't. So why should he? The salary cap forces teams to make these choices. Now, that being said, you can always manipulate things and put things on a credit card. Eventually the bill comes due and you might be looking at things someday like the New Orleans Saints. But that is something you can do. However, the thing that you also have to account for here is if Bo Nix succeeds, you are going to have a Bo Nix contract, a mega Bo Nix contract that will kick in 2028. That would be the 5th-year option. And he'd start getting it really expensive. And then 2029, if all goes well, he would approach the stratosphere. So this is another thing about kind of putting it on the credit card. Any deal that you make for Nik Bonitto, Zach Allen, you don't want to put too much on the credit card because you're going to move out of the quarterback cost controlled window in a few years. And then if Bo Nix succeeds, move into the quarterback eating up a huge percentage of your cap. This right now, between now and 2028, is actually the window where you can pay a lot. You can have a lot of these contracts for edges, interior defensive linemen in the pass rush, corners, even receivers. You can do this. When your quarterback gets expensive, this is when the choices start to get more difficult. So right now, hey, go ahead and pay. Go ahead and pay. I'd say take advantage of Bo Nix being incredibly affordable. But I would also say that when the Broncos are doing their accounting cap-wise, try not to do too much in terms of pushing things out, because you're going to have the Bo Nix deal coming in. Now, there's another thing that happens here, and that is Bo Nix's contract would be done around, presumably you're working it up. So if he succeeds, if Bo Nix blossoms and is the franchise quarterback that everyone in Broncos country hopes he can be, that contract is being worked on in 2027, 2028. Maybe it's worked on before the fifth-year option kicks in, perhaps, just to get all the I's dotted and the T's crossed, etc. And that means you're working on it before the new CBA kicks in, before they're talking about the new CBA in 2030, before you start getting around to the new television contracts, etc. So perhaps you have a chance to get it done in a window before contracts spike again with revenues going up and then the cap going up again. So maybe there's a window there to get it as perhaps, I say affordable. These numbers the numbers keep getting ridiculous, but makes the numbers of a decade ago look kind of quaint. Anyway, Mace running solo. Yep, it's just me today. Just me running solo. Cecil on assignment, and back tomorrow. Back on the radio. Back here with me talking Broncos. We're actually going to have our first Broncos press conference of the season. We'll hear from at least a couple of players tomorrow. It's the annual kickoff to the season that the Broncos have to start training camp. We're not expected to hear from Sean Payton. This is interesting. Usually we hear from the coach at the start of camp. Not tomorrow. We are not going to hear from Sean Payton. We're expecting to hear from Sean Payton on Wednesday, which is the start of what they call the acclimation period. And what happens, there is a 2-day, what they call acclimation period, to ramp up, get the players ready for the official start of training camp, which is Friday. That's the day that fans will be out at Broncos Park, powered by Common Spirit, for the first time. That's when everyone's going to be on hand. The several hundred fans that'll be in the bleachers that are just beyond the wall. So fans will technically be outside the walls of the facility, but over the wall. So no problem seeing it. It's actually going to be a pretty nice vantage, especially for one of the fields, for those of you who have tickets and are going to be able to come out there and check out practice. So it's different. It's different for this year. And then next year will be something entirely different as well, as the new building is completed. But anyway, 2-day acclimation period, then training camp starts on Friday. We'll hear from Sean Payton on Wednesday. We'll hear from some players tomorrow. Don't yet know who we're going to hear from. Frankly, I'd like to hear from Dre Greenlaw because we have not heard from him since the Broncos signed him. One of the consequences of a shorter offseason, having one fewer week than usual with OTAs, is that was one fewer week to hear from players. And so we didn't have as many opportunities to talk to guys. And of course, because rain completely scuttled the Healthy Swings event down at Coors Field, we didn't hear from a lot of guys then like we normally would. So that's why it's been a little bit light in terms of how many players we've heard from, unfortunately, this offseason. And of course, it's a lot different with Sean Payton and how player access is compared to how it used to be. Just these things that you have to navigate. I know, don't tell me about the labor, just show me the baby, as the old cliche goes. But it is what it is. Jeremy says, hopefully Sean Payton is in a better mood this season for his press conference. Well, it'll be on Wednesday. And so Cecil will be on the air. So Cecil will not be there to ask about any players that stood out this offseason. There will not be any questions about Lucas Kroll being the best player of the offseason. Oh, boy. The thing I will always recall is how Sean gave Cease an out by saying best tight end or best player. And that happened. I'm like, okay, all right. There in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, tight end. Because there was an argument that, yes, Lucas Kroll was the best tight end on the field during OTAs. last year. I think that was a perfectly cromulent, I like to use that word, that made up word from The Simpsons, perfectly cromulent argument for that. And poor Cece did not take that. Did not take that. Oh my. Holy diver. I was on assignment from 9 p.m. last night until around 8 this morning. Well, I'm glad your assignment, as it were, took you here. Mike Naylor, edge rushers money is going to keep going up. Yeah. And that's why it's an interesting thing to talk about whether you get Nik Bonitto's contract done as soon as possible, as in before the season, before he starts stacking more games, or do you wait and see what some of the depth looks like? Do you wait and see, for example, if there's an indication that Jonah Ellis is going to take the next step up? As George Payton noted back at the league meetings in Palm Beach, does he make a move like Nik Bonitto did? Then what? Does Dondrea Tillman build off that? Is Q Robinson for real? I'm really curious to see what Q Robinson looks like when the pads go on. He was a stud in OTAs. He was wrecking things. Of course, Jonah Ellis was coming off the surgery that he had following the injury that he had in the Bills playoff game. And so that gave a lot of opportunities for Dondrea Tillman and Q Robinson to work together against the twos and with the twos. And they were just destroying things. It wasn't fair. I mean, it was, the backup tackles were overwhelmed. But it's out of pads. Let's see what happens when the pads go on. Now, with Dondrea Tillman, we've got the film from last year. We've got the data. We know there's something there. We've seen it. We know he can play. We know there's some promise. Q Robinson, let's see what happens when the pads go on. If full pads go on and we're still talking about Q Robinson and he's still wrecking things, then it gets interesting. Q Robinson, very much a projection based on athletic traits, based on relatively limited sample size at Alabama, but can't deny how well he looked, or how good he looked back during OTAs. Holy diver. Without Bonito, we'd have Cooper, Ellis, and Tillman. That is impressive, honestly. We can move on from Bonito. If Robinson and Johnny Walker look good in the preseason games, yeah, there's another guy to watch, Johnny Walker Jr. So they've invested heavily in edges. I mean, Johnny Walker Jr., in some capacity, Johnny Walker Jr. is going to be on this team. And in fact, it would not at all surprise me if the initial 53 that we see at the cut down has 6 edges on it. Now, that 6th edge would be Johnny Walker Jr., and he may not be getting a jersey, but based on the bonus that he got, the guaranteed money that he got, that would tell me there's a place for him on the roster. No doubt about it. The Broncos value him. They like him. And unless he goes out there and is dreadful, I wouldn't be surprised if he's on the 53. Of course, we saw Frank Crum struggle last year, but the Broncos prioritized him, and he stuck as well. And lo and behold, when Garrett Bowles had to miss a day during OTAs, what to my wondering eye should appear but Frank Crum working with the first team. So when they like guys, when they believe in them, they want to keep turning the page, and they believe in Frank Crum. Q Robinson, steal of the draft. Mark my words, guys. Okay. We're going to mark your word on that, Jermaine. Q Robinson, steal of the draft. We appreciate you. We appreciate you joining us here on Orange and Blue Day, or just joining me. I say us, but it's just me today. Just a solo show, me producing, me hosting, me getting those clips, getting out there to the Nik Bonitto camp yesterday. I drove a long way. Drove 1/3 of the way across the country Saturday and Sunday to get back to Colorado, and then Went straight there to Columbine High School to catch up with Nik Bonitto. Wrote a couple of stories. And then we'll see. I'm probably going to be a little late getting into this Rockies Cardinals game, but I'll still get there. See how Nolan Arenado looks in his latest return to Coors Field, and then back out to Broncos Park, powered by Common Spirit tomorrow to really get underway. As I was telling somebody over at the office today, it's time to start the long stretch, the marathon. Here we go. Settle in. What I think we all hope is about a 7-month run all the way to Santa Clara and the Super Bowl. I think that's what we're all hoping for. Anyway, appreciate you following us here. Of course, you can help us out by like, comment, share, subscribe, and hitting that notification bell so that you never miss a vid here that Cecil and I have on Orange and Blue today. Thanks for rolling with me, and we'll have plenty more tomorrow and plenty more throughout the week. By the way, we're on a regular season schedule. We're on our regular schedule for the season, and it's training camp as well, which means you get a bonus, a little on you up. You'll have a show on Saturday because there's a practice on Saturday too. So more OBT than you can shake a stick at. For Cecil, who's on assignment, it's Mace. Take care. Thanks for watching.